It's me again. Thanks, Kyle, for inviting me for two talks. So I'm Alex Brace. I guess reintroduce myself. I'm a grad student here at U Chicago in Ian's group. And I think Kyle wanted me to talk about GenSlim, which is our project for applying large language models to genome data sets. And I kind of adapted it to serving science foundation models on leadership computing platforms. And then that turned into how do large language models and workflows combine? So we're going to see kind of a mix and mash of a few things. But maybe before I start, so when I think of Parsel, I think of, as a scientist, a way to construct workflows to combine multiple applications into a single sort of cohesive framework that then I can make a scientific discovery from. So that's just sort of my perspective as a Parsel user. And so the primary application I want to talk about is sort of rooted in this, what we call central dogma of molecular biology. And this basically describes your high school, college biology, where you start with, some DNA, perhaps from a genome, and it gets, transcribed as a mRNA copy, which everyone's probably familiar with now after COVID. And then this mRNA gets translated into a protein amino acid sequence, and that is ultimately responsible for folding into this 3D structure. And that's what I talked about earlier, is how do we simulate those 3D structures with computing. So we built a large language model, similar to ChatGPT or these other large language models, but instead of training on natural language, we actually train on genome data sets. And we're training on essentially that RNA level. So this is one step above the protein. It actually encodes more information than just the amino acid sequence layer. And so this is one of the largest foundation models trained on these raw nucleotide sequences. It actually won the Gordon Bell last year for HPC-based COVID-19 research, because the idea was we want to be able to predict future variants of concern. We want to be able to understand how is COVID evolving. And so this is the purpose for building this large language model. So as a result of that work, one thing that came out of it is this large workflow. And this was sort of our first introduction to Colmena and to Parsel and really implementing these at scale. So one of the key parts to take away from this workflow is not all the details, but this idea of how we're combining large language models with traditional workflows. And in this case, we're taking a pre-trained language model, which is, we're doing all the training ahead of time using large MPI-based parallelism. We're taking that model and then we're using it as sort of an embedded component of a workflow. So here you could think of a workflow as, each of these blocks is a different, function you'd like to implement with Parsel. And, we're running the language model as a component of each of those function calls. And that's helpful for doing the scientific analysis that we need to do. So in terms of COVID, we can look at semantic similarity. In other words, how different is the current, variant from existing variants? We can look at the likelihood of observing that sequence compared to what's been observed before. We can also do things like run, if you've heard of AlphaFold, which is a protein folding artificial intelligence model. We can run that because we're now in a Parsel workflow, so we're not bound to or not restricted to the language model. So we can combine all these, sort of methods together to characterize the immune escape and the fitness of a given variant. And then we can combine those to determine its variant of concern score. And this is useful, of course, for World Health Organization and other health agencies that would like to get a sort of early reading just strictly from the genome sequence before doing any sort of clinical evaluations or anything, just strictly from the genome sequence. Can we determine if this is a concern or if it's so similar, we have existing immunity? So that's the key question this workflow seeks to answer. Another workflow we've developed, so that was one workflow. Another workflow actually looks at fine-tuning a language model. So now we're not just using a large language model as a component of a workflow, but we're actually using the workflow as a fine-tuning step. And why might you want to do that? Well, if you want to do protein design, or if you want to design a protein for, digesting plastic or some other, engineering application, then you'd like to take one of these large language models that can generate proteins and sort of tweak it to prioritize proteins of interest for your task. And so this you could imagine adding simulations or adding other, function prediction methods to a reward model that then rewards the large language model towards generating those sequences of interest. And you're basically using a fine-tuning step very similar to how ChatGPT was trained with the reinforcement learning from human feedback, although now the human feedback is replaced with biophysics and other methods. So that's another type. And now, so here's where I sort of went into, okay, how do LLMs combine with workflows? So I'll just walk through a series of bullets that kind of lead to an interesting conclusion. So we have the LLMs in workflows, which we sort of mentioned, which is, if we can embed the, LLM inference and fine-tuning within workflows, we can use them as subroutines to do scientific analysis. And we can also do the fine-tuning based on outputs from traditional HPC, workloads like simulation. We also have LLM-driven workflows, which is another sort of step where we're using AI techniques to drive workflows, pick the next set of experiments to advance a scientific campaign. And of course, you could use a large language model to guide that as well. And those could be workflows that are sort of a mix of the traditional, workflow or, traditional applications and ML or AI-based functions. And so those are currently in existence. That's the star. The question marks are sort of the future. So LLM-generated workflows. In other words, could you sort of combine, a parcel-enabled LangChain, which is a way to combine, or it's a way to give language models the access to call external functions and to sort of build out workflows. Like if I want to evaluate a math function, the large language model could pick the right function that then runs a standard computation to evaluate the result. So you can think of Wolfram Alpha integrations and so forth. So could you add parcel as a component here to enable functions that require HPC, resources? The other type is, could you choose the types of tasks to run, or could you choose your workflow components to advance scientific campaigns? So can you get the large language model to pick the particular types of simulation engine or particular types of machine learning as a surrogate on top? And then you can also generate functions from literature, and we're working on that in the context of robotics. And this ultimately builds to this goal of, can we build modular composable workflows? So can I take the output of one workflow and automatically put it into another in sort of a seamless way that doesn't require much engineering? And this builds this idea of, you could have automated LLM proposed scientific campaigns that then evaluate or sort of build on workflow space where they don't have to worry about the details, but they can sort of combine workflows together in interesting ways. And so you ultimately have scientific discovery proposed as an automated search problem over the space of workflows. So you can sample workflows from a generative distribution. And this is maybe where I'll leave it. So just as an example prompt, maybe in a system like 2-3 years from now, you could say, you are a workflow developer, build a workflow which trains an ML-based molecular docking surrogate using high throughput screening, and then runs DeepDrive-MD on top candidates to physically verify the protein ligand binding site. And please provide example configurations compatible with your Aurora supercomputer to investigate drug candidates from enemy database for all known SARS-CoV-2 targets. And if you're thinking it won't know the targets, I already asked it that, and the standard ones already do. So that's pretty much taken care of. So this is where I think it could go, and it's kind of interesting, higher order application of workflows. And this was supposed to be the folks at the talk. The gist is that there's a tutorial on how you can actually serve large language models. I have it set up for Polaris. You can just change the parcel configuration. And you can pretty much serve, billion parameter large language models using this page detention algorithm. And it's pretty cool. You can basically create a CLI, sort of recreate the ChatGPT interface for yourself and adapt it with other sampling parameters and so forth. So that the code's all there. So that's the talk. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah. Will you permit me to be a little contrarian?
Yes, please.
Go back to your prompt.
No,
it's exciting.
It was supposed to be controversial.
But I know what the output from that is going to be. Import pandas. Right. That's where I think the channel. That's where I think that it's. I think that the LLM generating the thing to be executed is the place where we're at now. But then when it fails.
Well, and that's why I think you need modular. You need modular systems. So you need sort of like containerized workflow modules that then you can synthesize into these larger workflow systems. Then you can innovate on the space of the workflows, right? So you need sort of pre-verified workflow modules to solve that. Yeah. But this is where I see a lot of the middleware that's being developed. They kind of naturally will support that.
Right, and I think maybe I'm not really focused on couldn't find pandas. I'm focused on when things go wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's a lack of understanding of the functionality of the machine within the model. Right, the model knows its intention. I think knows, but yeah, that's where I think the challenge is.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In your view, for the future world where that prompt works, what's like the next biggest unsolved problem, and is someone working on it?
Well, I think innovating on the space of workflows, right? So you could go basically from grant to summarize into steps, then to summarize into computational steps, and then to workflows, right? And then to results. So then you can innovate on the results. So it's the question of, right now as a workflow developer, as I am, you have to do all this manually. So if you can automate at least a component of that, what does that free you up to do, right? How does that free up your thinking to focus on the ideas?
So like summarizing that, see if I got it, like the next thing to work on is better hooks into like making workflows such that the LLM could hook into it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a current challenge. How do I take DeepDrive MD and plug it into a docking workflow? Right, so that's something I have to do manually and think about. And if I use a different docking, surrogate model, then I have to change the whole thing. So that's sort of, I'm trying to propose we move towards these modular systems that kind of do that automatically.